Part 1. They call it the Whispering Tower. I suppose every abandoned, half-ruined structure acquires a name eventually, whispered amongst the locals, passed down through generations like a dark folktale. But this name, this whispered moniker, held a deeper resonance, a tremor of truth that even the most skeptical couldn't entirely dismiss. It suggested secrets, ancient and unsettling, secrets that clung to the stones like moss, secrets I can now, finally, reveal. The tower sits nestled within the folds of the Pyrenees, a forgotten sentinel against a backdrop of jagged peaks and perpetual mist. For centuries it has stood there, a silent witness to the changing tides of history. Shepherds avoid it. Hunters give it a wide berth. Even the birds seem to prefer the open sky to the shadow it casts upon the valley floor. There's a palpable unease surrounding the tower, a sense of wrongness that prickles the skin and settles deep within the bone. They say it's haunted, of course. They say many things. They speak of strange lights flickering within its crumbling walls, of disembodied voices carried on the wind, of a chilling presence that watches from the empty windows. These are the stories told to frighten children, the campfire tales meant to keep them close to the hearth at night. But beneath these surface whispers, there lies a darker, more disturbing truth. A truth I lived. I first encountered the Whispering Tower during a solitary hike through the Pyrenees. I was young then, restless, driven by a thirst for exploration and a fascination with the forgotten corners of the world. I had read about the tower in obscure historical texts, fragments of information hinting at a connection to the Knights Templar, the enigmatic warrior monks shrouded in myth and legend. The official accounts spoke of a simple watchtower, a strategic point overlooking the ancient pilgrimage routes. But the whispers hinted at something more, something hidden, something sinister. I was drawn to it, compelled to unravel the mystery that clung to its crumbling stones. My initial explorations revealed little. The tower was in a state of advanced decay. The outer walls were weathered and cracked, the wooden beams rotted and collapsing. The spiral staircase, once a proud ascent to the summit, was now a treacherous maze of crumbling stone and precarious gaps. Yet, even in its ruined state, the tower exuded a strange power, a silent testament to its former glory. I spent days exploring the surrounding area, charting the lay of the land, studying the architecture, searching for any clue that might shed light on its true purpose. I found nothing concrete, only more questions, more whispers on the wind. It was during a particularly fierce storm that I stumbled upon the entrance to the hidden chambers. Lightning illuminated the hillside, revealing a barely discernible crack in the rock face, concealed beneath a tangle of overgrown ivy. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and a growing sense of dread, I pulled back the vegetation, revealing a narrow passage leading deep into the earth. The air within the passage was cold and stale, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something indefinable. Something unsettling. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to flee from this place of shadows and secrets. But the whispers beckoned, urging me forward, promising answers to the questions that haunted me. Armed with only a flickering lantern and a growing sense of foreboding, I descended into the darkness. The passage twisted and turned, descending deeper and deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. The walls were smooth and damp, as if carved from living rock. The further I descended, the stronger the sense of unease became, a palpable pressure that settled upon my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I felt as though I were entering a tomb, a place where the dead whispered secrets to the living. And yet, I pressed on, driven by a force I couldn't understand, a compulsion that bordered on obsession. I was about to discover the truth about the Whispering Tower, a truth far more terrifying than any campfire tale, a truth that would change my life forever. I escaped the tower, where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 2 of 25. The forest floor was damp and yielding beneath my bare feet. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, echoed the frantic pounding of my heart. The moon, a sliver of bone in the inky sky, offered little comfort, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed like the memories I couldn't shake. The iron collar, still chafing my neck, was a constant, chilling reminder of my captivity. I hadn't stopped running since I scrambled over the broken wall, the crumbling stone tearing at my skin as I desperately clawed my way to freedom. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to be as far from that tower as humanly possible. The oppressive silence of the forest, broken only by the whisper of the wind and my ragged breathing, was almost worse than the screams that had echoed through the tower's halls. Those screams, they were a chorus of the damned, a symphony of suffering that resonated deep within my bones. They belonged to the others, the ones I'd left behind. The guilt gnawed at me, a ravenous beast tearing at my insides. I had escaped, but at what cost? I stumbled, my weakened body finally betraying me. I fell hard, the impact jarring my already bruised and battered frame. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the cold earth a stark contrast to the damp stone floor of my cell. The forest pressed in on me, a suffocating blanket of darkness and unseen terrors. Slowly, I pushed myself up, ignoring the throbbing pain in my leg. I had to keep moving. They would be looking for me. The Templars. Just the thought of them sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Their pale, emotionless faces, the glint of fanaticism in their eyes, the way they moved with an unnerving grace. They were not human. Not anymore. I pushed on, driven by a primal fear that bordered on madness. I had no food, no water, no weapons. Only the tattered remnants of the prison garb that clung to me like a shroud. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, an endless labyrinth of shadows and whispers. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small stream. The water, icy cold, was a welcome relief. I drank deeply, cupping my hands and letting the liquid flow down my parched throat. As I knelt there, I caught my reflection in the water. My face was gaunt, my eyes hollow, my skin pale and drawn. I looked like a ghost, a specter haunting the edges of the world. I splashed water on my face, trying to wash away the grime and the fear, but it was no use. The fear was ingrained, a permanent fixture in my soul. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I slowly turned, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for the source of the sound. Nothing. Just the whispering wind and the rustling leaves. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer or a rabbit, but a cold dread settled in my stomach. I knew, deep down, that I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched, a sensation I'd grown accustomed to in the tower, had returned. It was a palpable presence, a weight on my chest, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in my leg. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay here. This place felt wrong, tainted. As I pushed deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller, their branches intertwined, blocking out what little moonlight remained. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. It smelled of decay, of something ancient and corrupt. I stumbled upon a clearing, a small patch of bare earth in the heart of the forest. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, stained with what looked like dried blood. Surrounding the altar were a circle of stones, each etched with strange, unsettling symbols. The air here was even thicker, the sweet, decaying smell almost overpowering. A low growl echoed through the trees, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee, to get as far away from this place as possible. But my legs felt like lead, my body paralyzed by fear. The growl grew louder, closer, and then I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing red in the darkness, emerged from the trees. They were followed by a hulking shape, a monstrous figure that moved with an unnatural grace. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs long and spindly, its head elongated and grotesque. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over bone, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It stalked towards me, its red eyes fixed on me, a predatory gleam in their depths. The growl turned into a low chuckle, a sound that was both chilling and familiar. It was then that I realized, with a sickening certainty, that the Templars weren't the only things I had to fear. The tower wasn't the only prison. The forest held its own horrors, its own secrets, and I had just stumbled into their domain. The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth and decaying leaves. each step I took whispering my escape to the silent trees. The chill air, free of the tower's stale, metallic scent, bit at my exposed skin. I had no destination, only the frantic need to put as much distance as possible between myself and that hellish spire. The rough-spun tunic and trousers I'd scavenged from the guard I'd overpowered offered little warmth, but they were infinitely preferable to the thin, stained shift I'd worn in my cell. Hulls. Dawn painted the eastern sky in bruised hues of purple and gray as I stumbled upon a shallow stream, its surface reflecting the nascent light. I knelt, cupping the icy water in my hands and drinking deeply. The first truly clean water I'd tasted in what felt like an eternity. My reflection stared back, gaunt, pale, with dark circles etching the skin beneath my eyes. A stranger looked back at me, someone haunted by something I couldn't yet name. Following the stream, I hoped it would lead me to civilization, to safety, but what constituted safety now? Who could I trust? The Templars' reach was long, their influence pervasive. The world outside the tower was just a larger prison, and I was a fugitive. The stream eventually led to a rough, overgrown track, barely more than a deer path. Hesitantly, I followed it, my senses hyper-alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through me. I kept imagining the sound of pursuit, the rhythmic thud of boots, the clang of armor. But there was only the whispering wind and the mournful cry of a distant bird. As the day wore on, the forest began to thin, giving way to rolling hills dotted with stunted trees. In the distance, I saw the faint outline of a structure, a dark smudge against the horizon. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, fluttered in my chest. As I drew closer, the structure resolved itself into a dilapidated farmhouse, its windows dark and lifeless, the roof partially collapsed. Smoke curled from a makeshift chimney, a tantalizing hint of life within. Hesitation warred with desperation. Could I risk approaching? Were the inhabitants friend or foe? The Templars' network of informants stretched far and wide. I could be walking into a trap. But the alternative, another night exposed to the elements, vulnerable and alone, was unthinkable. I approached cautiously, my hand hovering near the small, rusty knife I'd taken from the guard. The air around the farmhouse hung heavy with the scent of wood smoke, and something else, something faintly metallic, that sent a shiver down my spine. I crept to the nearest window, peering into the dimly lit interior. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Two figures sat hunched over a table, their faces obscured by the shadows. Their voices, low and guttural, drifted to me through the cracked pane, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart pounded against my ribs. I had to know who they were. Taking a deep breath, I knocked tentatively on the warped wooden door. The voices inside ceased abruptly. A moment of silence hung heavy in the air. Then the sound of shuffling footsteps approached. The door creaked open, revealing a woman with a face etched with deep lines and eyes that held a disturbing mixture of suspicion and something else, something akin to recognition. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy like dry leaves rustling in the wind. I escaped," I stammered, my voice hoarse, "from the tower." The woman's eyes widened, and a flicker of understanding, perhaps even fear, crossed her face. She glanced over her shoulder at the figure still seated at the table, a man with a thick, tangled beard, and eyes that glittered in the firelight. He rose slowly, his movements stiff and deliberate, and approached the door. He scrutinized me with an unsettling intensity, his gaze lingering on the crude bandages I'd wrapped around my arms, covering the marks left by the Templars' experiments. "The tower," he murmured, his voice low and gravelly. "You escaped the tower." He exchanged a look with the woman, a silent communication passing between them. Then he turned back to me, a strange, almost predatory smile spreading across his face. "Come in, child," he said, his voice laced with a false warmth that sent a chill down my spine. "You must be weary. We'll take care of you." The door swung open wider, revealing the dark, shadowy interior of the farmhouse. The metallic scent was stronger now, thick and cloying, and I realized with a growing sense of dread what it was. The smell of blood. I hesitated, my hand tightening around the knife hidden beneath my tunic. Something was terribly wrong. I had escaped the tower, but I had a sinking feeling that I had stumbled into another kind of prison, a different kind of nightmare. And this one might be even worse. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 4. The forest pressed in, a suffocating blanket of twisted branches and gnarled roots that clawed at my tattered clothes. The moon, a sliver of bone in the inky sky, offered little comfort. I pushed on, driven by a primal fear that vibrated through every cell. The whispers had started again, softer this time, like the rustling of dry leaves in a graveyard. They seemed to emanate from the forest itself, slithering into my ears, probing my sanity. I hadn't eaten in days. The gnawing emptiness in my stomach was a constant companion, rivaled only by the chilling dampness that clung to me like a shroud. My bare feet were bloodied and raw, each step a fresh agony. Still, I couldn't stop. The tower, though receding with every labored breath, cast a long shadow over my heart. I felt its presence like a phantom limb, a constant reminder of the horrors I'd left behind. I stumbled upon a stream, its water black and sluggish. I knelt, cupping my hands, desperate for even a single drop. As I brought the water to my lips, a reflection shimmered in the inky surface. It wasn't mine. A face stared back at me, gaunt and pale, eyes wide and hollow. Strands of matted hair framed a face that I vaguely recognized, yet it felt alien, distorted. It was me, but stripped bare, reduced to the primal fear that propelled me forward. I recoiled, scrambling back from the stream as if it were a venomous serpent. The whispers intensified, coalescing into fragmented words. Not safe. They see. They always see. My breath hitched in my throat. They were watching. The Templars, or whatever they truly were, hadn't relinquished their hold. They were still hunting me, their invisible gaze burning into my back. I had to find shelter, someplace to hide, even if it was only temporary. Deeper into the forest I went, the trees closing in until the sliver of moon was completely extinguished. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the twisted skeletal forms of the ancient trees. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying sweetness that made me nauseous. Then, through the oppressive darkness, I saw it. A faint flicker of light, pulsating like a dying ember. Hope, fragile and fleeting, flickered within me. I pushed through the undergrowth, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The light led me to a clearing. In the center stood a small, dilapidated cottage, its single window glowing with an unnatural orange light. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the same sickly sweet scent that permeated the forest. Hesitation gnawed at me. This place felt wrong, deeply wrong. But the alternative, remaining exposed in the darkness, hunted by unseen eyes, was unthinkable. I approached the cottage cautiously, each step crunching on dry leaves and twigs, announcing my presence. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of the interior. The orange light emanated from a fire in a stone hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. A single figure sat hunched by the fire, their back to me. "Hello?" My voice was a dry rasp, barely audible above the whispering wind. The figure didn't move. "Please," I croaked. "I need help." Slowly, deliberately, the figure turned. My blood ran cold. The face was obscured by shadow, but 2 points of burning orange light stared out at me, like embers in the darkness. They weren't human eyes. Terror, raw and visceral, seized me. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. The figure rose, its form elongated and distorted in the flickering firelight. It was tall and thin, impossibly thin, like a skeleton draped in rags. Its arms were long and spindly, ending in hands that were more like claws. A low, guttural growl emanated from the figure, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within the earth. It took a step towards me, and the shadows around it seemed to writhe and coalesce, taking on grotesque shapes. The whispers reached a crescendo, no longer fragmented words, but a unified chorus of chilling laughter. "Welcome," they hissed. "You've found sanctuary." I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I hadn't escaped the tower's horrors. I had simply stumbled from one nightmare into another. The forest, the cottage, the creature before me, they were all connected, all part of something far more ancient and terrifying than the Templars and their twisted experiments. I had traded one prison for another, And this one, I feared, offered no escape. The creature lunged. I escaped the tower, where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 5. The forest pressed in, a suffocating blanket of shadow and whispers. The towering pines swayed like mournful giants, their branches skeletal fingers against the bruised twilight sky. I stumbled onwards, my bare feet lacerated by thorns and sharp stones, driven by the phantom echo of chanting that seemed to seep from the very earth. The village, when I finally reached it, offered little solace. Huddled amongst the trees like a frightened child, it exuded an unnatural stillness. Smoke, thin and gray, curled listlessly from only a few chimneys. The houses, built of dark wood and hunched beneath thatched roofs, appeared to lean inwards, conspiring secrets. No lights flickered in the windows, no laughter spilled from within. It felt abandoned, yet not quite empty. My stomach growled, a hollow protest against the gnawing emptiness. I hadn't eaten since I couldn't remember. Time in the tower was a formless, shapeless thing, stretched and distorted beyond recognition. Days bled into weeks, weeks into an eternity of cold stone and whispered prayers. Hesitantly, I approached the nearest house. The door, warped and weathered, hung ajar, revealing a glimpse of a darkened interior. I pushed it open further, the creak of the hinges echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The air inside was stale and thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic, like dried blood. Dust motes danced in the single sliver of moonlight that pierced through a gap in the boarded-up windows. Furniture lay overturned, as if someone had fled in a hurry. A child's wooden toy lay discarded on the floor, its painted smile a grotesque mockery of the desolation around it. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The tower, the chanting, the experiments, it was all too much. My mind, so long held captive in the Templars' iron grip, struggled to comprehend the reality beyond those stone walls. I needed to find someone, anyone. Someone to tell me where I was, to assure me that the world outside the tower wasn't as broken as it appeared. Gathering my courage, I continued through the village, each silent house echoing the emptiness of the last. Finally, I reached a larger building at the center, distinguished by a crudely fashioned cross hanging above the door. A church? Perhaps a place of sanctuary. As I neared, a faint light flickered from within. Hope surged through me, fragile but fierce. I raised my hand to knock, but froze. A low, guttural chanting emanated from within, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't the Latin hymns of the Templars. This was something older, more primal. A rhythmic pulse that resonated deep within the earth, stirring a fear I couldn't name. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. A group of villagers, their faces obscured by the shadows, stood in a circle around a makeshift altar. In the center, a fire burned, casting an eerie glow on the object placed before it. It was a human figure, bound and gagged. My breath caught in my throat. The chanting intensified, rising to a feverish crescendo. The villagers began to sway, their movements jerky and unnatural. One by one they raised their hands, each clutching a long, wickedly curved knife. Terror, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, what was about to happen. This wasn't a sanctuary. This was a slaughterhouse. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The chanting continued, a relentless, hypnotic drone that filled the air. I turned and ran, blindly, desperately, back into the oppressive darkness of the forest. The chanting pursued me, echoing through the trees, growing louder with each frantic step. I could hear them now, the villagers, their heavy footsteps pounding the earth behind me. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my skin, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The tower, the chanting, the sacrifice, it was all connected, a horrifying tapestry woven with threads of ancient fear. I stumbled, falling heavily to the ground. The breath whooshed from my lungs, a sharp pain lancing through my side. I struggled to my feet, but my legs felt weak, my body heavy. The chanting was closer now, almost upon me. Through the trees, I saw a flicker of light, a small cottage nestled amongst the pines, a single candle burning in the window. Sanctuary, or another trap, I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't outrun them. I had to take a chance. I staggered towards the light, my legs screaming in protest. The chanting reached a deafening crescendo as I reached the door. I pounded on it, desperate, frantic. The door swung open, revealing a face. Old, wrinkled, framed by wisps of white hair. Eyes, ancient and knowing, stared back at me. A smile, slow and unsettling, spread across her lips. "Welcome, child," she whispered, her voice raspy with age. "We've been expecting you." The chanting stopped. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 6. The chanting grew louder, a guttural, rhythmic pulse that resonated not just in my ears, but in my bones. The woods themselves seemed to vibrate, the very air thickening, becoming heavy with an unseen pressure. I pressed deeper into the thorny embrace of the bramble bush, ignoring the stinging scratches, focused only on remaining unseen. The flickering torchlight danced through the gaps in the foliage, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and stretched like grasping claws. They were close, closer than before. I held my breath, tasting the metallic tang of fear on my tongue. The earth beneath me trembled slightly. A tremor that had nothing to do with the chanting, and everything to do with the enormous, cloaked figure that emerged from the trees. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen, its head obscured by the deep cowl of its cloak. In its hand it carried a staff, not of wood, but of something dark and glistening, like polished obsidian. Behind it, more figures emerged, cloaked and hooded, their faces hidden in shadow. They moved with an unnerving synchronicity, their steps silent and precise. These weren't the Templars I knew from the tower. These were different, darker. The chanting reached a crescendo as the giant figure stopped, its staff planted firmly in the earth. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. A low hum emanated from the staff, resonating with the chanting, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to wrap around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I watched, paralyzed with terror, as the smaller figures formed a circle around the giant. They raised their hands, their movements slow and deliberate, and began to chant in unison, their voices deeper, more resonant than before. The air shimmered above the staff, a heat haze distorting the scene. The humming intensified, the vibrations growing stronger until I felt like my teeth were going to rattle out of my skull. Then, the earth beneath me cracked. A fissure, thin and jagged, snaked its way across the ground, heading directly towards my hiding place. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it was deafening. I could feel their eyes on me, even through the brambles. Slowly, cautiously, I opened one eye. The fissure had stopped just inches from the bush. The giant figure stood motionless, its head still obscured by its cowl. The smaller figures had lowered their hands, but their attention remained fixed on my hiding place. Then, the giant spoke. Its voice was not human. It was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. "It hides," the voice boomed, echoing through the trees. "The tainted one hides." "Bring it forth," another voice commanded, sharp and cold. This one was human, though distorted and unnatural. Two of the cloaked figures stepped forward and reached into the brambles. Thorns ripped at my skin, but I dared not cry out. Their hands closed around my arms, their grip like iron. They pulled me from my hiding place, dragging me across the rough ground towards the circle. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. Their grip was too strong. They hauled me to my feet and forced me to stand before the giant figure. The cowl shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of what lay beneath. It wasn't a face. It was a mask, carved from some dark, polished stone. The mask was featureless, save for two empty sockets where eyes should have been. Yet, I could feel its gaze, cold and penetrating, boring into my soul. "You carry the taint," the giant rumbled, "the mark of the outsider." I didn't understand what it was talking about. What taint? What outsider? All I knew was that I was terrified. "Cleanse it," the cold voice commanded. "Purge the taint from this vessel." The giant raised its staff. The obsidian surface pulsed with a sickly green light. I closed my eyes, waiting for the blow, waiting for the oblivion I was sure would follow. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard a new sound, a rustling in the trees, a low growl, different from the giants, more animalistic, more familiar. I opened my eyes. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure I hadn't seen since I escaped the tower, a figure I thought I would never see again. It was Elias, and he wasn't alone. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 7. The old woman's cottage was a sanctuary, a pocket of warmth and normalcy in a world gone horribly wrong. But the normalcy was a fragile shell, even as the stew simmered on the hearth, filling the small space with the aroma of herbs and root vegetables. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woods pressed close, the wind whispering secrets through the gnarled branches of ancient pines. Every creak of the cottage, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of fear through me. Anya, the old woman, seemed oblivious to my unease. She hummed a mournful tune as she stirred the pot, her wrinkled face illuminated by the flickering firelight. I tried to focus on her, on the mundane task of preparing our meal. But my mind kept returning to the tower, to the hollow eyes of the other prisoners, to the chilling hymns the Templars chanted. "You are safe here, child," Anya said, her voice raspy but kind. "No one will find you here." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. But the Templars' reach was long, their methods insidious. I'd seen firsthand how they infiltrated communities, how they turned neighbor against neighbor, weaving their web of fear and control. How do you know they won't find me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Anya smiled, a network of wrinkles deepening around her eyes. "The woods protect their own. They have their ways." Her words were cryptic, laced with an unsettling undercurrent of something ancient and unknown. I didn't press her, fearing what she might reveal. I'd glimpsed enough of the strange, hidden world beneath the surface of everyday life. After we ate, Anya led me to a small room tucked away at the back of the cottage. The only furniture was a narrow bed covered with a patchwork quilt. The air was thick with the scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. "Sleep now," Anya said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Tomorrow we will talk." Exhaustion finally claimed me, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. My dreams were a swirling vortex of images. The tower, the chanting Templars, Anya's unsettling smile, the whispering woods. I woke with a gasp, my heart pounding in my chest. Moonlight streamed through a crack in the shutters, painting a silver stripe across the floor. I sat up, listening intently. There was a sound, a faint rhythmic thumping coming from outside. It was slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Fear coiled in my stomach. I crept to the window and peered cautiously through the crack. The woods were bathed in an ethereal glow, the trees casting long, skeletal shadows. And then I saw it. A figure, cloaked in white, stood at the edge of the clearing. It was motionless, its head bowed, but I could feel its presence, a palpable weight in the still night air. The rhythmic thumping seemed to emanate from it, growing louder with each pulse. My breath hitched in my throat. It was one of them, a Templar. I stumbled back from the window, my mind racing. How had they found me? How had they tracked me through the woods? Anya had said I was safe, that the woods would protect me. But there it was, proof that her words were hollow, that the Templars' power extended even into this hidden sanctuary. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew I couldn't. The cottage was surrounded, trapped within the Templars' net. My only hope lay with Anya. I scrambled to my feet and ran to her room. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open, calling her name. The room was empty. The bed was undisturbed, as if she hadn't slept there at all. A cold dread washed over me. Where was she? Had they taken her? I backed out of the room, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had to get out of there. I had to escape. As I tiptoed towards the back door, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned and saw Anya standing in the doorway, her face obscured by shadow. "Going somewhere, child?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. But there was something different in her tone, a chilling undercurrent that hadn't been there before. I stared at her, unable to speak. The moonlight caught her face, revealing a glint in her eyes, a predatory gleam that sent a shiver down my spine. "The woods protect their own," she said, her voice laced with an unsettling amusement, "and they demand their due." The thumping sound intensified, resonating through the cottage, through the very ground beneath my feet. It was no longer a heartbeat. It was the sound of drums, the rhythmic pulse of some ancient, unholy ritual. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that Anya wasn't my protector. She was the gatekeeper, the one who lured the lost and the vulnerable into the woods, into the waiting arms of the Templars. The white-cloaked figure outside moved, its head slowly rising. The moonlight illuminated its face, revealing the vacant, soulless eyes of the Templar. And behind it, emerging from the shadows of the trees, were more figures, all cloaked in white, all silent and still, like ghosts in the moonlight. I was trapped. There was nowhere left to run. The woods, once my sanctuary, had become my prison, and Anya, the old woman who had offered me shelter, was the key to my undoing. The horror of the tower had followed me, seeping into the very fabric of the world, twisting everything familiar into something monstrous and terrifying. And as the Templars closed in, their chanting rising in a crescendo of unholy sound, I knew that my escape had been an illusion, a brief respite before the true nightmare began. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 8. The forest pressed in, a claustrophobic embrace of shadow and rustling leaves. I clutched the rough-spun cloak tighter around me, the thin fabric offering scant protection against the biting wind that slithered through the trees. Dawn was still a distant promise, the only light filtering through the dense canopy a spectral, ethereal gray. Every snapping twig, every rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth sent jolts of fear through me, echoing the constant, dull throb of pain from my still-healing wounds. I hadn't stopped running since I'd tumbled out of the secret passage, the image of Brother Marius's twisted smile seared into my mind. The forest floor was uneven and treacherous, hidden roots and rocks threatening to send me sprawling. My bare feet were already cut and bruised, but I dared not slow down. They knew I was gone. They would be hunting. I hadn't seen any sign of civilization since my escape, only the endless expanse of trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I had no idea where I was, or which direction to go. My only compass was the primal instinct to survive, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that accursed tower. The thought of the tower sent shivers down my spine. The memories, though fractured and distorted by what they had done to me, were starting to resurface. Flashes of cold stone, the metallic tang of blood, the chanting that vibrated through the very walls, and the whispers. Always the whispers, insinuating themselves into the silence, promising salvation through suffering. I stumbled over a fallen log, the impact jarring through my body. I cried out, more from the sudden surge of terror than the pain. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering against my ribs, certain I had alerted my pursuers. I listened, straining my ears against the wind, but heard nothing. Still, I didn't dare remain in one place. Driven by a desperate urgency, I pushed deeper into the woods. As the sky slowly began to lighten, the forest revealed itself in greater and more unsettling detail. Twisted, gnarled trees stood like sentinels, their bark covered in strange phosphorescent moss that pulsed with an eerie light. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something sweet and sickeningly metallic. I came across a stream, its water black and sluggish. Crouching down, I cupped my hands and drank deeply, the icy water momentarily soothing my parched throat. As I straightened, something caught my eye. A glint of metal, half hidden beneath the tangled roots of a nearby tree. Cautiously I approached. It was a small, silver locket, tarnished with age. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the intricate engravings on its surface. It felt oddly warm to the touch, as though it held a spark of life. Hesitantly, I opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman with long, dark hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore a simple white dress, and a melancholic smile played on her lips. A strange sense of familiarity washed over me, a feeling of recognition that I couldn't quite place. I clutched the locket tight, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Perhaps this was a sign, a clue to help me find my way. But as I turned to continue my journey, a sound stopped me dead in my tracks. A low, guttural growl, echoing from the shadows. My blood ran cold. I slowly turned back towards the stream, my eyes scanning the darkness. The growl came again, closer this time, and then I saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing like embers in the gloom, fixed on me with predatory intensity. They were unlike any animal eyes I had ever seen. large and luminous, radiating an unsettling intelligence. The creature remained hidden in the shadows, its form obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its presence, a palpable wave of malevolence washing over me. Terror seized me. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The locket slipped from my numb fingers, falling into the black water with a barely audible splash. I didn't dare retrieve it. The growling intensified, closer now, accompanied by the sound of something large moving through the undergrowth. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever lurked in the darkness was not something I could outrun, not something I could fight. I turned and fled, plunging back into the forest, the growls echoing behind me, spurring me on. The branches whipped at my face, the thorns tearing at my skin. I didn't care. All that mattered was escape. But as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just being hunted by the Templars. Something else was out there, something ancient and malevolent, and it had taken an interest in me. The whispers I had heard in the tower, they seemed to be echoing in the wind, no longer confined to the stone walls. They were everywhere, whispering my name, promising salvation through suffering. And this time, I wasn't sure if I could escape. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 9. The whispers started again the moment I closed my eyes. Not the echoing Latin chants from the tower, but something closer, more intimate. They slithered into my dreams, formless and cold, coiling around the remnants of my sanity. I saw distorted flashes of the tower's interior, the spiraling staircase, the rusted iron cages, the glistening obsidian altar. But they were wrong, twisted, as if viewed through a cracked lens. And always, those whispers, just on the edge of comprehension, promising secrets, offering power, demanding something. I woke in a cold sweat, the rough blanket tangled around my legs. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers, casting long, flickering shadows across Ilara's small cottage. She was asleep in the chair opposite, her head resting on her chest, a single, gray braid draped over her shoulder. The rhythmic creak of the rocking chair was the only sound, a lonely counterpoint to the frantic hammering of my heart. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It wasn't the paranoia that had clung to me since my escape, a constant, low-humming fear. This was different, sharper, more focused, like a needle pressing against my skin. I rose carefully, trying not to wake Ilara, and padded over to the window. The moon hung fat and low in the sky, casting an eerie silver light across the desolate landscape. The skeletal trees clawed at the horizon, their branches stark against the inky backdrop. Nothing moved. Yet, the feeling persisted. I spent the rest of the night huddled by the dying embers, too afraid to close my eyes again. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the cottage, sent a jolt of fear through me. Dawn brought a fragile sense of relief, but the unease remained, a knot tightening in my stomach. Ilara woke with the first rays of sunlight, her eyes bleary but sharp. She saw the fear etched on my face and, without a word, placed a warm mug of herbal tea in my hands. "The whispers are getting worse," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ilara's gaze was steady, understanding. "They will try to break you," she said, her voice low. "They want what you took." "But I took nothing," I protested, the frustration bubbling up. "I barely escaped with my life." Ilara shook her head. "They believe you carry something precious, something that gives you power, something they crave." I thought back to the altar, the chanting, the blinding light. I had felt something then, a surge of energy, a connection to something ancient. But I had taken nothing physical. Could it be possible that they were right? Could I have inadvertently absorbed something from that ritual? The thought sent a chill down my spine. What if I was carrying some part of their twisted power within me? What if that's what the whispers were after? "What do they want?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ilara looked away, her face troubled. "They want you to return, to complete the ritual." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. "Return? I would rather die." "We need to leave," I said, my voice urgent. "We need to get as far away from here as possible." Ilara nodded slowly. "I know a place, a hidden sanctuary in the mountains. It will be a long and dangerous journey, but it's our only hope." We spent the day preparing, gathering what few supplies we could carry. The air hung thick with a sense of impending doom. The whispers were a constant presence now, no longer confined to my dreams. They followed me, taunting me, promising power and threatening destruction. As the sun began to set, we slipped out of the cottage and into the gathering darkness. The forest pressed close, its shadows deep and menacing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. We hadn't gone far when we heard it. The sound of hooves, pounding against the hard earth, getting closer. My heart lurched in my chest. They had found us. We broke into a run, the undergrowth tearing at our clothes. The sound of the pursuit grew closer, relentless. I could hear the shouts of the Templars, their voices echoing through the trees, their words laced with a chilling blend of fanaticism and fury. We stumbled through the darkness, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. The whispers were a cacophony now, drowning out all other sounds. I could feel their presence closing in, a suffocating wave of malice. Then, through the trees, I saw it, a flickering light, a faint glow in the distance. Hope surged through me, fragile but fierce. Alara saw it too, and we pushed ourselves harder, driven by the desperate need to reach that sanctuary. But the Templars were gaining. I could hear their horses snorting, their riders cursing. The whispers intensified, promising power, demanding surrender. And then, just as I thought we were lost, the ground beneath my feet gave way. I escaped the tower, where the Templars kept their living prisoners, Part 10. The whispers started subtly, a rustling at the edge of my hearing like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. I dismissed them initially, attributing them to the wind rustling through the skeletal branches of the trees that clawed at the bruised sky. But as I trudged deeper into the forest, the whispers grew, coalescing into distinct voices, though the words remained unintelligible. They seemed to emanate from the very air itself, clinging to me like spider silk. The forest, once a potential sanctuary, began to feel oppressive, closing in around me. The trees, gnarled and twisted, seemed to lean inwards, their bare branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grasp me. The shadows lengthened, deepening into an unnatural gloom even though the sun still hung low in the sky. A pervasive chill settled in the air, a coldness that seeped into my bones, making my teeth chatter despite the thick cloak I'd scavenged from the deserted village. The whispers intensified, pressing against my skull, a cacophony of murmuring voices that seemed to be trying to burrow their way into my mind. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was futile. The whispers resonated within my skull, a chorus of unseen tormentors. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped my heart. I quickened my pace, half running, half stumbling through the undergrowth, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of the unseen voices. I stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path, barely discernible beneath the layer of fallen leaves. Driven by a primal instinct to escape, I followed it, hoping it would lead me away from the whispering horror that clung to me like a shroud. The path wound deeper into the forest, the trees becoming denser, the air thicker with the unsettling murmurings. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and sickly green, the path opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a crumbling stone structure, barely more than a ruin. It was a small chapel, its roof partially collapsed, the walls overgrown with ivy and moss. A single stained glass window remained intact, depicting a scene of unsettling familiarity. A knight, clad in white, holding a bloodied sword aloft, his foot resting on the chest of a prostrate figure. The whispers reached a fever pitch in the clearing, swirling around me like a vortex of sound. I pressed my back against the cold stone of the chapel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could almost understand the words now, fragments of sentences, distorted and menacing, reaching through the din. Return, the vessel must be cleansed. Suddenly a figure emerged from the shadows of the ruined chapel. My breath caught in my throat. It was a woman, dressed in a simple, gray robe. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and dark, yet strangely luminous. She moved with an unsettling grace, her feet seeming to barely touch the ground. She stopped a few feet away from me, her gaze piercing, unwavering. "You carry it," she whispered, her voice raspy, as if unused to speech. "The taint, the vessel." Terror choked me. I knew instinctively that she was talking about the mark on my wrist, the brand that the Templars had seared into my flesh. I don't understand, I stammered, shrinking back against the cold stone. The woman took a step closer. You must return, she repeated, her voice gaining strength, the whispers around us seeming to feed her words. The cleansing, it must be done. She raised a hand, her long skeletal fingers reaching towards me. I recoiled, desperate to escape her touch. I scrambled to my feet and turned to flee, but the whispers intensified, forming an invisible barrier around me. I was trapped. The woman's laughter, dry and brittle, echoed through the clearing. You cannot escape, she hissed. The vessel, it belongs to us. Her hand closed around my wrist, her fingers icy cold against my skin. I cried out, a strangled sob of terror escaping my lips. The mark on my wrist burned, as if it were being rekindled by her touch. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and the world began to spin. The whispers grew louder, consuming me, drowning me in their cacophony of sound. I felt a sharp, searing pain in my head, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold stone floor of the ruined chapel. The woman was gone. The whispers had subsided, replaced by a chilling silence. The mark on my wrist throbbed, a constant agonizing reminder of my captivity, my purpose, my fate. I was alone, lost in the heart of the forest, surrounded by the unseen presence of something ancient and malevolent. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my escape from the tower was only the beginning of my ordeal. The Templars had marked me, and they would find me. And whatever their purpose for me, it could not be good. I pressed myself against the damp earth, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. The whispers, once a distant murmur, now scraped against my sanity like fingernails on a chalkboard. They spoke of things unseen, things lurking in the shadows that stretched long and skeletal from the gnarled trees around me. The forest, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a menacing labyrinth. The Templars' words echoed in my mind. The forest safeguards its secrets. A chill, colder than the autumn air, snaked down my spine. What secrets? What was he guarding against? Or worse, what was guarding him? My hand instinctively went to the small, leather-bound book I'd salvaged from the tower. Its pages, filled with archaic symbols and unsettling illustrations, remained stubbornly indecipherable. I clutched it tighter, a perverse sense of comfort in its tangible presence. It was the only piece of the tower I had managed to bring with me, a reminder of the horrors I'd escaped, and perhaps a key to understanding them. I pushed myself to my feet, the aching in my limbs, a dull throb compared to the gnawing fear in my stomach. The moon, obscured by a veil of clouds, offered little illumination. The trees, twisted and ancient, seemed to close in around me, their branches skeletal fingers reaching out. I walked for what felt like hours, the whispering never ceasing, growing in intensity with every step. It shifted from a murmur to distinct words, words that pricked at the edges of my understanding, words that spoke of rituals, of sacrifice, of something unholy. Then, through the trees, I saw it, a faint flicker of light, pulsating like a dying ember. Hope surged through me, fragile but potent. Could it be a farmhouse, a village? Any sign of civilization would be a lifeline in this desolate wilderness. As I drew closer, the whispering intensified, laced now with a note of warning, of dread. The flickering light grew larger, revealing not a welcoming dwelling, but a clearing bathed in an eerie, unnatural glow. In the center stood a stone altar, stained dark, almost black. The air crackled with an unseen energy. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the forest. A figure knelt before the altar, cloaked in shadow, their face obscured. The figure swayed rhythmically, chanting in a language I didn't recognize, yet somehow understood. It was a language of supplication, of abject terror. The flickering light emanated from a small fire at the base of the altar. Something lay within the flames, something that writhed and twisted, emitting a high-pitched squeal that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't make out what it was, but the sight of it, coupled with the chanting and the oppressive atmosphere, sent a wave of nausea rolling over me. I wanted to flee, to turn back and lose myself in the darkness of the forest, but an invisible force held me rooted to the spot. I was compelled to watch, to witness this unholy ritual unfold. The figure raised their hands above the altar, and the chanting reached a fever pitch. The flames flared, illuminating the object within. It was a small animal, a rabbit perhaps, or a hare. Its fur was singed black, its eyes wide with terror. The figure brought down a gleaming blade, and the animal's squeal was abruptly cut short. A wave of heat washed over me, and the air grew thick with the coppery tang of blood. The figure remained hunched over the altar for a moment, then slowly rose. The cloak fell back, revealing the face beneath. My blood ran cold. It was the Templar. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now burned with an unnatural fervor. He turned towards me, a slow, deliberate movement. A smile stretched across his face, a grotesque parody of human expression. "You found us," he rasped, his voice hoarse and distorted. "You found our sanctuary." He gestured towards the altar, towards the charred remains of the animal. "The forest demands its tribute, and now," his smile widened, revealing teeth-stained crimson, "it demands yours." He took a step towards me, and the whispering in the forest erupted into a cacophony of voices, chanting in unison with the Templar. They were welcoming me to my doom. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I had stumbled upon something far more terrifying than the tower. I had escaped one prison only to find myself trapped in another, a prison woven of shadow and sacrifice, a prison ruled by an ancient, malevolent power that resided within the very heart of the forest. And the Templar, once my captor, was now its devoted servant. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 12 of 25. The scratching returned that night, a frantic rasping against the boarded-up window of the abandoned farmhouse. Sleep, already a fragile thing, shattered completely. I sat bolt upright, the rough wool blanket pooling around my waist, heart hammering against my ribs. The wind howled outside, mimicking the scratching, playing tricks on my already frayed nerves. But I knew it wasn't the wind. Nothing natural made that sound, that desperate plea for entry. I hadn't lit a fire since arriving, fearing the smoke would attract unwanted attention, but now the biting cold seemed a small price to pay for the comfort of light. My hands trembled as I struck flint and steel, the small spark catching on the tinder. The flames grew, casting flickering shadows that danced across the room, morphing familiar shapes into monstrous apparitions. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was even more unsettling. It was a heavy, pregnant silence, the kind that precedes a storm or a scream. I gripped the iron poker from beside the hearth, its cold metal a small comfort against the growing dread. Then, a soft thump, from the roof. My breath hitched. Whatever it was above me. I strained my ears, listening for another sound, any indication of its intentions. The wind picked up again, rattling the loose panes of glass in the other window. Then, another thump. Heavier this time. Closer. I crept towards the door, poker raised, each step an agonizingly slow decision. I needed to get out, to run, to put as much distance between myself and this thing as possible. But the rational part of my brain, the part that still clung to some semblance of sanity, screamed that running into the unknown darkness was suicide. Another thump, directly above me, the ceiling creaked ominously. Then, silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I stood, frozen, every muscle tense, waiting. The silence was a suffocating blanket, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a rhythmic drumbeat against the oppressive quiet. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I crept towards the ladder leading to the loft. The wood groaned under my weight. Every creak, every groan, amplified in the oppressive silence, felt like a betrayal, announcing my presence to whatever lurked above. Reaching the top, I hesitated. The loft was pitch black, the only light filtering up from the meager fire below. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I pushed open the hatch. The cold air rushed down, carrying with it the scent of damp wood and something else, something faintly metallic, like blood. I fumbled for my tinderbox, striking the flint against the steel. The spark caught, illuminating the small, dusty space, and then I saw it. A hole. A gaping hole in the roof, just above the spot where I had heard the thumping. The edges were ragged, splintered, as if something had clawed its way through. And on the floor, beneath the hole, a single dark feather. My stomach churned. The feather was unlike any I had ever seen. Long, black, and iridescent, with a strange, almost oily sheen. It seemed to pulse faintly in the flickering light, as if still alive. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers brushing against its smooth surface. A jolt, like static electricity, shot up my arm. I recoiled, dropping the feather as if it were burning. Suddenly the scratching returned, this time from below, from beneath the floorboards. I scrambled down the ladder, my heart pounding in my chest. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the house. I backed away from the sound, towards the boarded-up window. The poker felt flimsy in my grip, useless against whatever was clawing its way up from below. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed across the walls. The growling intensified, closer now, directly beneath my feet. The floorboards groaned and buckled. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. Then, with a sickening crack, the wood splintered. A dark, clawed hand, tipped with what looked like obsidian talons, shot up through the gap, grasping at the air. I screamed, a primal sound born of pure terror, and stumbled back, falling against the wall. The hand retracted, disappearing back into the darkness below. But the growling continued, a low, menacing rumble that promised a return. I knew I couldn't stay. This place was no longer a refuge, it was a trap. I scrambled to the door, fumbling with the latch, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The growling grew louder, the scratching more frantic. I threw open the door and plunged into the darkness, the icy wind tearing at my clothes, the unknown terrors of the night, a preferable alternative to the horrors within. As I ran, I could hear the sound of splintering wood behind me, followed by a triumphant roar that echoed through the night, and then something else. A sound that chilled me to the bone, the beating of vast, leathery wings. I pressed deeper into the shadowed alcove of the crumbling church, the stench of stale incense and something far more acrid clinging to the air. The whispers, the incessant, sibilant whispers, were louder here, clinging to the stone like moss. They spoke of sacrifice, of cleansing fire, of the Watcher who sees all. My skin crawled. The medallion, nestled beneath my ragged shirt, felt cold and heavy against my sternum. The village of Sulpice, or what remained of it, was a ghost of its former self. Hollowed-out buildings stood like skeletal remains against the perpetually gray sky. The wind howled through broken windows, a mournful dirge echoing the whispers in my head. Even the crows, normally eager scavengers, seemed to avoid this place, a testament to the unnatural stillness that permeated the air. I hadn't seen another living soul since escaping the tower. Days, maybe weeks, had blurred into a relentless cycle of fear and flight. My supplies were dwindling, the stolen bread hard and stale, the water skin almost empty. But thirst was a minor discomfort compared to the gnawing dread that the Templars were still hunting me. I needed information, sanctuary, anything to break this cycle of despair. Sulpice, marked on the tattered map I'd pilfered, had been my desperate hope. The map, however, offered no warning of this desolate emptiness, this unsettling quiet. Driven by a desperate thirst, I cautiously approached the village well. The rusted bucket creaked ominously as I lowered it into the dark depths. The water, when it came up, was tinged a sickly yellow. I hesitated, fear warring with dehydration. The whispers intensified, urging me to drink, promising oblivion. My hand trembled as I brought the dipper to my lips. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the square. I whirled around, every nerve on fire. A broken shutter flapped in the wind, the source of the noise, but the sudden sound had shattered the illusion of stillness, revealing a new layer of unease. I saw it then, a flickering light in the window of what looked like a former apothecary. Hope, fragile and flickering like the light itself, ignited within me. I approached the building slowly, hand hovering over the small knife I'd managed to keep hidden. The door creaked open at my touch, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with shelves of dusty jars and dried herbs. The air was thick, with the scent of decay and something sweet almost cloying. "Hello?" My voice was a croak, barely a whisper. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman hunched and withered, her face obscured by a dark shawl. Her hand, gnarled and twisted like the roots of an ancient tree, gripped a flickering candle. "You shouldn't be here," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. I need help," I stammered. "I'm lost and—" She raised a hand, silencing me. "I know who you are," she said, her voice surprisingly strong now, resonating with an unsettling authority. "I know what they did to you in the tower." My heart hammered against my ribs. How could she know? Was this a trap? They call me Anya," I whispered, clutching the medallion tighter. The woman chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "Names mean little here," she said, her eyes, dark and piercing, finally visible beneath the shawl. "They took more than your name in that tower, didn't they?" I swallowed, unable to speak. She knew. She knew about the experiments, about the whispers, about the Watcher. "The Templars, they cleansed this village," she continued, her voice laced with a chilling matter-of-factness. "A necessary sacrifice, they said, to appease him." She gestured with the candle towards a shadowed corner of the room. I saw it then, a crude altar fashioned from broken wood, stained, dark and sticky. On it lay a small, clay figure, its features vaguely human, but distorted, grotesque. "They worship something else now," the woman whispered, her eyes wide with a terrifying mix of fear and reverence. "Something that came from the tower." A wave of nausea swept over me. The whispers in my head intensified, twisting into a cacophony of screams. The medallion burned against my skin. "The Watcher," I choked out. The woman nodded slowly. "He hungers," she said, her voice barely audible above the whispers. "He demands tribute." She turned her gaze back to me, her dark eyes glinting in the candlelight. "And he knows you're here." The floorboards beneath me groaned. I looked down. A dark, viscous liquid was seeping up between the cracks, spreading across the floor like a living thing. It smelled of the tower, of blood and fear, and something ancient and foul. The woman smiled, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. "He has chosen," she whispered. The whispers in my head reached a crescendo, drowning out all other sounds. The medallion pulsed with a searing heat. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I hadn't escaped the tower at all. I had simply walked into a larger cage. I escaped the tower, where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 14. The chanting grew louder, closer. It snaked under the door of the abandoned farmhouse, a slithering whisper that pricked at the edges of my sanity. The storm outside raged, mirroring the tempest in my soul. Rain lashed against the boarded-up windows, a relentless barrage that echoed the pounding in my chest. Isabel huddled beside me, her face ashen, eyes wide with terror. We'd found this place by chance, a crumbling refuge miles from the tower, yet even here we weren't safe. They were coming. "We need to go," I whispered, my voice hoarse. My leg, injured during my escape, throbbed with a dull ache that intensified with every approaching chant. Isabel nodded, her lips pressed tight. We'd been running for days, fueled by adrenaline and fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a Templar, every rustle of leaves a sign of their pursuit. The amulet, heavy against my chest, pulsed with a faint warmth, a constant reminder of the burden I carried, the secret I had to protect. We moved as silently as we could, the decaying floorboards groaning beneath our weight. The farmhouse was a labyrinth of shadows and cobwebs, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, like old blood. We made our way to the back, hoping to find a way out, an escape from the encroaching darkness. But the back door was locked, secured by a thick, rusty bolt. Panic gnawed at me. The chanting was almost upon us, a guttural drone that vibrated in my bones. Isabel fumbled with the bolt, her hands shaking. "It's no use," she whimpered. tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, a floorboard beneath us gave way, plunging us into darkness. We landed hard, the air knocked from our lungs. For a moment, all was silent, save for our ragged breathing. Then, the chanting resumed, closer than ever, as if they were directly above us. We were in a cellar, a small, dirt-floored space, lit only by a sliver of moonlight filtering through a crack in the wall above. The air was cold and damp, and the metallic smell was stronger here, almost overwhelming. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and I saw it. A shape in the corner, covered by a ragged piece of burlap. My heart hammered in my chest. Slowly, cautiously, I approached it. The burlap was stiff, stained dark in places. I reached out a trembling hand and pulled it back. Beneath lay a skeleton, not just any skeleton. This one was chained to the wall, its bony fingers intertwined as if in prayer. A small, leather-bound book lay next to it. A wave of nausea washed over me. This place wasn't just a farmhouse. It was a prison, just like the tower, but smaller, more intimate. The Templars had been here. They had used this place for something unholy. Isabel whimpered again, clinging to my arm. "What is it? What's down here?" I didn't answer. I was too focused on the book. It was old, the leather cracked and dry. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface. The title, barely visible, was embossed in faded gold lettering, Liber Tenebris, the Book of Shadows. The chanting above grew louder, accompanied by the heavy thud of footsteps. They were searching the farmhouse. Room by room, they would find the cellar soon. With trembling hands, I opened the book. The pages were brittle, filled with a script I didn't recognize, interspersed with strange diagrams and symbols. As I turned a page, a loose sheet of parchment fell out. I picked it up, my blood running cold. It was a drawing. A drawing of the amulet I wore, the one I had stolen from the tower. Beneath it, a single word was written in the same faded gold ink as the book's title, Clavis. Key. The amulet was the key. But a key to what? Suddenly, a loud crash from above. They had found the cellar door. We were trapped. Isabel sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. "We're going to die!" I looked at the amulet, then back at the book. The chanting was deafening now, vibrating through the very foundations of the farmhouse. A desperate idea formed in my mind. A dangerous idea. I clutched the amulet, closed my eyes, and began to read aloud from the Liber Tenebris. The words were strange, guttural, unlike any language I had ever heard. As I spoke, the amulet grew warm against my skin, pulsing with a strange energy. The chanting above faltered, then stopped. A silence descended, heavy and oppressive. I continued to read, my voice rising, echoing in the confines of the cellar. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen power. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to writhe and coalesce. The metallic smell intensified, becoming almost unbearable. And then, a whisper. A voice, not from above, but from beside me, close to my ear, cold and ancient. "You have summoned me." I escaped the tower, where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 15 of 25. The whispers started again. Not the guttural, rasping ones from inside the walls. Those had, thankfully, faded after I crossed the river. But softer, insidious whispers, seemingly carried on the wind. They skirted the edges of my hearing, just on the periphery of consciousness, refusing to form into discernible words. It was a maddening tickle, a constant suggestion that something was being said, something vital, but something I was just not quite capable of grasping. The landscape itself seemed to be amplifying this unease. I'd been following the river south for 3 days, the oppressive presence of the tower dwindling with each step, but the terrain had become increasingly desolate. The trees, twisted and gnarled, their branches skeletal fingers against the bruised purple of the perpetual twilight. The ground beneath my feet was barren, the earth a dry, cracked husk that crumbled into dust with each footfall. Even the river, my guide and lifeline, seemed to be sickening, its once clear water now a murky, sluggish stream. The whispers grew louder. I began to feel a gnawing hunger, not just for food, though my meager supplies were dwindling rapidly, but a deeper, more primal hunger. It felt like a hole had been carved out of my very being, an emptiness that craved something. I wasn't sure what, but the whispers hinted at it. danced around it, driving me further into this barren wasteland. On the fourth day, the river disappeared. One moment it was there, a sluggish, meandering line cutting through the desolate landscape. The next it vanished into the parched earth, leaving behind only a dry, cracked riverbed. Panic gripped me. The river had been my only constant, my only guide. Without it, I was truly lost. The whispers became a chorus, a swirling vortex of sound that pressed in on me from all sides. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was no use. They seemed to emanate from within my own skull. Then, through the haze of fear and confusion, I saw it. A figure in the distance. A solitary silhouette against the dying light. Hope, desperate and fragile, flared within me. Perhaps it was a traveler, a shepherd, anyone who could point me toward civilization. As I approached, the figure grew taller, more imposing. It wasn't human. It resembled a man, but stretched and distorted. Impossibly elongated, its limbs thin and spindly, like the branches of the dead trees around us. Its head was small and pointed, almost bird-like, perched atop its impossibly long neck. It stood perfectly still, its back to me, as if waiting. The whispers coalesced into a single, piercing voice that echoed inside my head. "Husus, come closer." Terror battled with a strange, magnetic pull. I knew I should run, flee back the way I came, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The figure beckoned, not with any discernible movement, but with an overwhelming sense of inevitability. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The ground beneath my feet felt strange, spongy and yielding. I looked down and realized that the earth was covered in a fine, white powder. It was bone dust. The ground was littered with the remnants of countless skeletons, ground down to nothing by the relentless passage of time and the unforgiving elements. As I drew closer to the figure, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Taunt the gift. We offer you the gift. Not the gift." The words resonated with a power that sent shivers down my spine. I still didn't understand what it was, but I knew I craved it, needed it, with a desperate, aching hunger. The figure slowly turned, its movements unnatural and jerky. Its face was shrouded in shadow, but I could make out two glowing red points where its eyes should have been. They burned into me, searing my very soul. "The gift will fill the emptiness," the whispers promised. "It will make you whole." I was just a few feet away now. The air around the figure shimmered, distorted by some unseen force. A sickeningly sweet smell, like decaying fruit and burnt flesh, filled my nostrils. "Embrace the gift. Distort, the whispers urged. Become one with us." I reached out my hand, drawn in by an irresistible force. The figure extended its own impossibly long skeletal fingers. Our fingertips brushed. A searing pain shot through my arm, followed by a wave of intense heat. It felt like my blood was boiling, my flesh melting away. I screamed, a raw, animalistic sound that echoed across the desolate landscape. The figure's grip tightened. I could feel its power flowing into me, corrupting me, changing me. The whispers became a deafening roar, drowning out all other thought, all other sensation. And then, darkness. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark, menacing silhouette against the blood-red sky. I was walking towards it, drawn by an unseen force, my legs moving mechanically, without my conscious control. I knew I should resist, that I should turn and flee, but I couldn't. The gift held me in its thrall, promising to fill the emptiness, to make me whole. And as I walked, I whispered along with the wind, the words, now familiar, now welcomed. "The gift, the gift, the gift." I pressed myself against the damp earth, the forest floor, a chilling counterpoint to the fever burning in my veins. The Templars' words echoed, a venomous mantra in my mind. "You can't escape what's inside you." He was right, of course. The tower, with its arcane rituals and suffocating darkness, had burrowed deep within me, a parasite I couldn't excise. Dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and sickly yellow, a landscape mirroring my internal turmoil. I had followed the stream as the old woman instructed, its burbling a fragile companion in the overwhelming silence. The woods themselves felt oppressive. the gnarled branches like skeletal fingers reaching out, the rustling leaves whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. My stolen Templar cloak offered little warmth. It reeked of mildew and something else, something acrid and metallic, like the smell of the branding iron they used on new arrivals. The heavy fabric chafed against the fresh wounds on my back, a constant reminder of my captivity. I kept expecting to hear the baying of hounds, the crunch of boots on fallen leaves, the chillingly polite voice of the Templar commander promising a swift return to my cell. The stream eventually led me to a crumbling stone bridge, choked with weeds and shadowed by ancient looming trees. As I crossed, I noticed strange carvings in the stonework, symbols that resonated with the disturbing imagery I'd seen in the tower. Spirals within spirals, eyes that seemed to follow my every move, and grotesque depictions of contorted human forms. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Beyond the bridge, the trees thinned, revealing a small, desolate village. Smoke curled from the chimneys of a handful of houses, but an unnatural stillness hung in the air. No children played in the dirt streets. No villagers gossiped at doorways. A thick fog clung to the ground, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Hesitantly, I approached the nearest house. The windows were dark, the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dim and dusty, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. A single, flickering candle illuminated a table in the center of the room. Upon it lay a loaf of bread, half-eaten, and a wooden bowl filled with a thick, grayish stew. My stomach growled, a desperate plea I couldn't ignore. I hadn't eaten in days. Cautiously, I dipped a finger into the stew and tasted it. It was bland but surprisingly warm. I devoured the remaining portion, the warmth spreading through me like a lifeline. As I finished, I noticed a movement in the shadows. A figure emerged, a woman, her face obscured by the gloom. She was small and frail, dressed in ragged clothes. Her eyes, when they finally met mine, were wide and hollow, like two black pits. "You escaped," she whispered, her voice raspy, barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. "They always come back," she continued, her gaze drifting towards the window, as if expecting to see the Templars emerge from the fog. "They always find a way." Her words were a chilling echo of the Templars' own pronouncements. I shivered, despite the warmth of the stew. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask. "I'm one of the forgotten," she replied, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They took my family, my memories, everything." "The Templars?" She nodded. "They experiment on us. They change us." She touched her face, her fingers tracing a faint, intricate pattern on her skin. In the flickering candlelight, I could just make out the same spiral design I'd seen on the bridge. A wave of nausea washed over me. I knew instinctively that the experiments she spoke of were the same rituals I'd witnessed in the tower, the same rituals they'd attempted to perform on me. "You need to leave," she said, her voice regaining a sliver of urgency. "This village is cursed. They'll sense your presence." "Where can I go?" I asked, despair creeping into my voice. "Follow the old road," she instructed, pointing towards a barely discernible path leading away from the village. "It leads to the mountains. There, you might find sanctuary." "But what about you?" She shook her head. "I'm already lost. There's no escape for me." As I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Beware the whispers," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "They'll try to lure you back. They'll promise you power, knowledge. Don't listen." I pulled away, her words echoing in my mind like a death knell. As I stumbled out into the fog, I could feel her hollow gaze following me, a stark reminder of the fate that awaited me if I failed. The village, shrouded in mist and silence, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable return of its tormentors. And somewhere, deep inside me, a dark seed planted by the Templars began to sprout, its tendrils whispering promises of power, of belonging, of a return to the very darkness I was so desperately trying to escape. I hadn't slept. How could I? The rhythmic chanting, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate within my very bones, continued relentlessly. It emanated from the forest, a place I swore I'd never return to after escaping the Templars' tower. But here I was, huddled in the hollow of a gnarled oak, the forest floor a carpet of damp leaves releasing a musty, earthy scent that mingled with the metallic tang of fear clinging to my palate. The village elder, a woman named Alara with eyes as ancient and deep as the forest itself, had warned me. "The chanting never ceases," she'd whispered, her hand, gnarled and spotted like a dying oak leaf, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "They are searching. They always search." She'd given me shelter, a small, Spartan room tucked away in the farthest corner of her home, its single window overlooking the very woods where the tower once stood, a jagged scar on the horizon. But the chanting, that insidious, pervasive drone, had seeped through the wooden walls, through the straw-stuffed mattress, into my very consciousness. Sleep was impossible. Escape, it seemed, was an illusion. So I'd fled into the very heart of the thing I feared, a desperate gamble driven by the suffocating claustrophobia of Alara's room, a feeling mirroring my imprisonment in the tower. Now the first pale fingers of dawn were reaching through the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in streaks of ethereal silver. The chanting intensified, becoming a guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I had to find the source. Alara had spoken of a hidden glade, a place where the Templars conducted their rituals. It was there, she claimed, that the true power resided. The power that fueled their relentless pursuit. The power that kept the chanting alive. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a sliver of desperate hope, I pushed myself deeper into the woods, following the direction of the chanting. The trees grew thicker, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the interwoven branches, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. I came across strange symbols carved into the bark of trees, intricate patterns that seemed to writhe and shift before my eyes. The air grew colder, a chilling breath against my skin despite the rising sun. The chanting pulsed around me, a living entity, guiding me, drawing me closer. Finally the trees parted, revealing a small, circular clearing bathed in an unnatural light. In the center stood a stone altar, stained a dark, rusty hue. Around it, figures robed in white chanted in unison, their faces obscured by deep cowls. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the air vibrating with an unseen energy. And then I saw it. On the altar, bathed in the unnatural light, was a pulsating mass of flesh. It writhed and pulsed, a grotesque parody of life, emitting the low, rhythmic thrum that had haunted my waking hours. It was the source of the chanting, the heart of the Templars. Power. I watched, paralyzed by a mixture of horror and morbid fascination, as the robed figures raised their hands, their movements synchronized, ritualistic. They began to chant louder, faster, the pulsating mass on the altar responding in kind, growing larger, its pulsations more violent. I had to get out of there. I had to warn Alara, warn the villagers. But my feet felt rooted to the ground, my body frozen in place by the sheer horror of what I was witnessing. Suddenly, one of the figures stopped chanting. He turned, slowly, deliberately, his hooded face directed towards my hiding place. I knew with a chilling certainty that he could see me. He raised a hand, pointing a skeletal finger in my direction. The chanting faltered, then ceased altogether. The other figures turned, their hooded faces swiveling towards me like owls drawn to the rustle of a mouse in the undergrowth. The pulsating mass on the altar shuddered, then stilled. The unnatural light faded, leaving the glade shrouded in the dim light of the forest. The figure who had spotted me began to walk towards me, his steps slow, measured, each footfall echoing in the sudden silence. The others followed, their movements mirroring his, a silent, terrifying procession. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body remained frozen, trapped in the grip of an unseen force. The chanting began again, softly at first, then building in intensity, a rising tide of dread that threatened to consume me. As the figures drew closer, I saw something glint in the hand of the lead figure. It was a dagger, its blade long and thin, reflecting the pale light of the dawning sun. The chanting grew louder, the pulsating mass on the altar began to throb again, and I knew with a sickening certainty that my escape had been a temporary reprieve. The Templars had found me, and this time there would be no escape. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 18. The whispers started subtly. Not voices, not yet, but a rustling, like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. I tried to dismiss it as the wind, a trick of the desolate landscape, but the air was still, heavy with the coming rain. It followed me as I stumbled through the gnarled, skeletal trees, a chilling counterpoint to the crunch of frost-covered leaves beneath my boots. I hadn't slept in what felt like days. Escape had been a brutal physical ordeal, and the psychological strain was even worse. The tower, with its cold, echoing chambers and the ever-present scent of incense and something else, something metallic and sickening, clung to me like a shroud. I kept seeing flashes of the other prisoners, their vacant eyes, their gaunt faces, the strange, ritualistic scars that marred their skin. The village I'd stumbled upon was deserted, its houses dark and empty. A thick layer of dust covered everything, suggesting it had been abandoned long ago. I'd found some preserved food in one of the cellars, enough to sustain me for a few more days, but the silence was unnerving. Every creak of a loose shutter, every rustle of the wind sounded like approaching footsteps. I found a dilapidated church at the edge of the village. The stained glass windows were shattered, depicting fragmented saints and grotesque, distorted angels. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. I huddled in a corner, wrapping myself in a tattered tapestry depicting a scene of judgment, the flames of hell licking at the feet of the damned. Ironically, it offered a small measure of comfort. That was when the rustling intensified. It was definitely inside the church now, swirling around me in the darkness. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic pounding of my heart. Then, a voice, faint and reedy, whispered my name. Elias. I scrambled to my feet, searching the shadows. Who's there? My voice cracked, thin and weak. Another whisper, closer this time. Elias, come home. Home? The tower was the closest thing I'd had to a home in years. The thought sent a shiver of revulsion through me. The whispering grew louder, coalescing into multiple voices, overlapping and intertwining. They spoke of things I couldn't understand, of rituals and sacrifices, of a coming darkness. They called me brother, son, savior. They promised me power, knowledge, belonging. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block out the insidious whispers, but they seemed to seep into my skull, burrowing deep into my mind. I knew, with a growing certainty, that these were the voices of the Templars' prisoners, the ones who hadn't escaped, the ones who had been changed. I staggered back, stumbling over a pew, and landed hard on the stone floor. The tapestry slipped from my grasp, revealing a hidden alcove behind the wall. Inside, a single candle flickered, illuminating a small wooden box. Driven by a morbid curiosity, I reached for the box. As my fingers brushed against the smooth wood, the whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of pleading and threats. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a silver key. It was intricately crafted, the handle shaped like a serpent coiled around a skull. The whispers reached a fever pitch, urging me to take the key to unlock the door to embrace the darkness. I hesitated. Something about the key felt wrong, deeply unsettling. It emanated a cold, unnatural energy that made my skin crawl. But the whispers were relentless, chipping away at my resistance. They promised me answers, an end to the torment, a release from the fear that gnawed at my soul. My hand trembled as I reached for the key. Just as my fingers closed around the cold metal, a new voice cut through the whispers. It was a woman's voice, strong and clear, filled with a strange, otherworldly resonance. "Don't touch it, Elias." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around the church, but there was no one there. The whispers continued their insidious chant, but the woman's voice, though faint, held a power that silenced them. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "A friend," the voice replied. "A guide. Put down the key, Elias. It's not what you think it is." I stared at the key in my hand, the serpent's eyes seeming to bore into me. The whispers promised power, belonging, an end to the loneliness. The woman's voice offered nothing but a warning. Which voice should I trust? The voices that had haunted me since my escape, or the voice of an unseen stranger? The rain began to fall, drumming against the shattered windows of the church. The wind howled, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The key felt cold and heavy in my hand. I didn't know what to do. The woman's voice whispered again, closer now, as if she were standing right behind me. "Don't listen to them, Elias. They'll destroy you. Trust me." The choice hung heavy in the air, a terrifying precipice between two unknown futures. The whispers were a chorus of temptation, the woman's voice a lone beacon in the storm. And the rain kept falling. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 19 of 25. The silence of the village was more unsettling than any scream. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, a grotesque mimicry of normalcy against the backdrop of deserted streets and shuttered windows. I'd been following the old shepherd's directions for hours, the path winding through a dense wood that seemed to swallow the sunlight. Emerging into this ghost village felt like stepping into a painting, vivid and detailed, but utterly devoid of life. My hand instinctively went to the crude bandage around my arm. The wound, inflicted by one of the Templars' hounds back in the forest, throbbed in time with my heartbeat. It needed tending, but the oppressive stillness of the village kept me moving. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every closed door a potential trap. I passed a well in the center of a small square, the bucket lying discarded on the mossy stones. A child's toy, a wooden horse, lay nearby, its paint chipped and faded. The scene pricked at some forgotten part of me, a memory of simpler times, a life before the tower, before the experiments. I shuddered, pushing the thought away. Sentimentality was a luxury I could no longer afford. The shepherd had spoken of a hidden passage in the church, a way out of the valley, a way to true freedom. The church stood at the far end of the village, its spire, a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the overcast sky. As I approached, the silence finally broke, a low, rhythmic chanting drifting from within. Hesitantly, I pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles, casting long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. A handful of villagers knelt in prayer, their faces obscured by the shadows. The chanting continued, a monotonous drone that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. I hesitated, unsure whether to approach or retreat. My appearance, ragged and dirty, my arm visibly injured, would surely attract unwanted attention. But the shepherd's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, seek sanctuary in the house of God. They will guide you. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The chanting ceased abruptly. The villagers slowly turned, their faces now visible in the candlelight. And that's when I saw it. Their eyes, blank, white, devoid of any life, just like the eyes of the subjects in the tower. A wave of icy terror washed over me. I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively reaching for the small knife I'd scavenged from the forest. The villagers rose as one, their movements slow and unnatural, their blank eyes fixed on me. Sanctuary, I croaked, the word a dry rasp in my throat. The shepherd he sent me. The villagers continued to advance, their silence more terrifying than any threat. One of them, a woman in a simple peasant dress, reached out a hand towards me. Her fingers were long and skeletal, the skin stretched taut over the bone. I backed away, my heart pounding against my ribs. This wasn't sanctuary. This was a trap. Turning, I fled towards the back of the church, desperate to find the passage the shepherd had spoken of. The villagers shuffled after me, their movements slow but relentless. I could hear their ragged breathing behind me, the sound growing closer with every step. I reached the altar, a massive stone structure carved with strange symbols. Panic clawed at my throat. There was no passage, no escape. I was trapped. Then I saw it, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the wall behind the altar. Hope surged through me, fragile but fierce. Pressing my hands against the crack, I pushed with all my might. The stone groaned, and the crack widened, revealing a narrow opening. I squeezed through the opening, just as the villagers reached the altar, their hands grasped at my heels, their cold fingers brushing against my skin. I kicked out, scrambling into the darkness beyond, the narrow passage closing behind me. I found myself in a dark, musty tunnel. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something sickly sweet, like decaying flesh. The chanting from the church echoed faintly through the stone walls, a constant reminder of the horrors I had just escaped. I stumbled forward, the tunnel twisting and turning, leading deeper into the earth. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint luminescence of strange fungi growing on the walls. My wounded arm throbbed with renewed intensity, the pain a sharp counterpoint to the creeping dread that filled me. Where was this tunnel leading? Was this truly an escape, or just another layer of the Templars' twisted game? The shepherd's words, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a cruel mockery. Had he sent me here to die? I pressed on, driven by a primal need to escape, to survive. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a subterranean labyrinth with no end in sight. The air grew heavier, the smell of decay more intense. And then, I heard it, a faint sound coming from the depths of the tunnel, a low, guttural growl, not human, not animal, something else. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped me. I wanted to run, to turn back, but the chanting from the church echoed behind me, a reminder of the horrors that awaited me there. I was trapped between two evils, with no escape in sight, and the growling grew louder, closer. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 20. The whispers followed me, even into the hallowed halls of the Vatican. I'd imagined sanctuary here, the sheer weight of religious history crushing the insidious murmurs that had become my constant companions. But the whispers adapted, twisting into Latin chants, liturgical murmurs that felt more sinister than soothing. They clung to the frescoes, slithered amongst the marble statues, even seemed to emanate from the very breath of the cardinals I passed. Cardinal Orsini, my supposed protector, had grown increasingly distant. His initial fervor to hear my story, to expose the Templars and their horrifying practices, had dwindled into polite disinterest. He claimed the Pope was preoccupied with matters of state, that my audience would be granted soon, but his eyes, once filled with righteous anger, now held a flicker of something else. Fear? Recognition? I spent my days confined to a small, opulent room within the Vatican walls. It was gilded and beautiful, but the thick velvet curtains blocked out the sun, and the silence, when the whispers subsided, was thick and suffocating. I paced the room, my bare feet sinking into the plush carpets, replaying the escape in my mind. Each time, a new detail emerged, a forgotten sensation, a fleeting image that sent shivers down my spine. I remembered the touch of the Templar's hand on my shoulder as he'd led me down into the depths of the tower. The chill of the air, tinged with a metallic scent I couldn't quite place. The rhythmic dripping of water echoing through the unseen tunnels. And the faces of the other prisoners, etched with a despair so profound it felt like a physical weight. They hadn't screamed. They hadn't begged. They'd simply stared, their eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight like polished obsidian. One face in particular haunted me, a young woman, no older than I, with hair the color of spun moonlight. Her eyes, wide and vacant, had followed me with a strange intensity. I hadn't seen her amongst the escaped prisoners, and the Templars had made no mention of her. Had she been left behind? Or was there something worse? Driven by a sudden, overwhelming urge, I began to sketch her portrait. I hadn't drawn in years, my hands trembling as I tried to capture the ethereal quality of her face. But as the image took shape on the parchment, the whispers intensified, twisting into her name, Serafina. Serafina. The name echoed in my mind, carrying with it a chilling resonance. It felt ancient, imbued with a power I couldn't comprehend. I searched my fragmented memories, desperately seeking a connection, a clue. Then, it hit me. One of the Templars, a gaunt, severe man with eyes like chips of ice, had spoken that name during a ritual I'd witnessed in the tower's subterranean chamber. A ritual involving a blood-red chalice and chanting that sounded like the rasping of insects. He'd called her the Vessel. The Vessel. The chilling implications sent a wave of nausea through me. What had Serafina been a vessel for, and what had the Templars planned to do with her? I had to find out. I had to find her. That night, the whispers became unbearable. They pressed against my skull, slithering into my dreams, transforming into visions of Serafina trapped in the darkness, her eyes pleading, her lips moving silently. Driven by a desperation I couldn't control, I crept out of my room. The Vatican corridors were eerily silent, lit only by the flickering flames of wall-mounted sconces. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic, like the air in the Templars' tunnels. I wandered through the labyrinthine hallways, guided by an unseen force, the whispers growing louder, urging me onward. I passed closed doors, each one seeming to hold its own secrets, its own darkness. Finally, I reached a heavy oak door at the end of a long, deserted corridor. The whispers reached a crescendo, pulsing against my eardrums, urging me to open it. My hand trembled as I reached for the iron handle. Suddenly, a hand gripped my shoulder. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. It was Cardinal Orsini, his face pale and drawn in the flickering torchlight. His eyes, however, held a strange glint, a feverish intensity I'd never seen before. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. I need to find her," I stammered, my voice barely audible above the relentless whispers. "Serafina." A strange smile crept across the Cardinal's face. "Serafina," he repeated, the name sounding different on his lips, laced with a chilling reverence. "Yes, she's waiting." He reached for the door handle, his fingers closing around the cold iron. "Come," he said, his voice a low murmur that sent shivers down my spine. "Let me show you." He opened the door, revealing a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow the light. And from within that darkness, I heard a faint, chilling whisper, my name. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 21 of 25. The chanting stopped. The echoing silence that followed was almost worse. It pressed in on me, amplifying the frantic thump of my own heart. I huddled deeper into the shadows of the alleyway, the rough stones scraping against my back. The rain, which had been a relentless companion since my escape, had finally ceased, leaving a thick, oppressive humidity in its wake. The air smelled of wet stone and something else, something acrid and unsettling like burnt hair. I clutched the small, leather-bound book I'd stolen from the tower. It was my only clue, my only hope of understanding what they had done to me, what they had planned for the others. Its pages were filled with a spidery script I couldn't decipher, interspersed with unsettling diagrams and disturbingly realistic anatomical drawings. Earlier, while fleeing through the winding, cobbled streets, I had stumbled upon a small, dimly lit apothecary. The elderly woman behind the counter, her face a road map of wrinkles, had given me a wary look but hadn't asked questions. I'd bought some antiseptic for the festering wound on my arm, a relic of my escape, and a small loaf of bread. It was the first real food I'd tasted in. I couldn't remember how long. Now, with the bread gnawed down to crumbs and the chanting silenced, the fear returned, a cold, creeping dread that settled deep in my bones. The Templars were still out there. I could feel it. They were searching, their unseen eyes boring into the very fabric of the city. I forced myself to breathe, to think. The chanting, it had seemed to emanate from somewhere close. Maybe one of the hidden chapels, or underground chambers, that riddled this ancient city. I had to find out what it was, what they were doing. It was a reckless impulse, I knew, but something stronger than fear, stronger than logic, compelled me forward. Following the lingering echoes, I crept through the labyrinthine alleyways, the darkness clinging to me like a shroud. The silence was punctuated by the occasional scuttling of rats and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace, every corner a potential ambush. Finally, I reached a small, unassuming square dominated by a crumbling fountain. The chanting, faint but distinct, was coming from a narrow archway, leading to what looked like a deserted courtyard. Hesitantly, I peered inside. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and the stone walls were covered in a thick layer of moss. In the center, a group of figures robed in white stood around a flickering fire. They weren't chanting now, but they were moving, swaying rhythmically, their arms raised towards the sky. The acrid smell was stronger here, thick and cloying. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had to get closer. I had to see what they were doing. Slowly, inch by inch, I edged my way along the wall, keeping to the deepest shadows. As I neared the group, I could see that the fire wasn't burning wood. It was something else, something pale and fleshy, and the swaying figures weren't just swaying, they were consuming. They were tearing pieces from the burning thing and eating them. The sight sent a wave of nausea surging through me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, horrified and mesmerized. As I watched, one of the figures turned, its face illuminated by the flickering flames. It was a face I recognized. Father Michael. He had been one of the priests in the tower, one of the men who had overseen the procedures. He had always seemed gentler than the others, more compassionate. But the look in his eyes now, it was devoid of any humanity, replaced by a chilling, predatory hunger. He saw me. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too pointed. He raised a hand, beckoning me forward. "Join us," he whispered, his voice raspy and unnatural. "Partake in the sacrament." The other figures turned, their faces masked by shadows, but their eyes burned with the same unholy light. I stumbled back, the book slipping from my grasp. The sound, though barely audible, echoed in the unnatural silence of the courtyard. Father Michael's smile widened. "You cannot hide," he hissed. "The shepherd knows where you are. He calls to you." He took a step towards me, and the others followed, their movements eerily synchronized. I turned and ran, the image of their burning feast seared into my mind. The shepherd. What was the shepherd? And what did they mean by sacrament? The questions clawed at my sanity. As I fled through the twisting streets, the chanting starting again, louder this time, closer, pursuing me through the darkness. The city, once a potential refuge, now felt like a trap, closing in around me, pushing me towards something terrible, something inevitable. The shepherd was calling, and I didn't know how much longer I could resist his call. I escaped the tower where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 22 of 25. The chanting intensified, resonating in my bones, a physical vibration that threatened to shatter something within me. I crouched behind the overgrown, crumbling statue of some forgotten saint, its face eroded by time and weather, a hollow mockery of divine protection. From my vantage point, I could see the procession. Torches flared, casting grotesque, dancing shadows against the towering walls of the ruined monastery. The Templars, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks, moved with an unsettling synchronized grace, their footsteps echoing the rhythmic chanting. In the center, carried on a litter draped in crimson velvet, lay the sarcophagus, the same sarcophagus I'd seen in my visions, the one that haunted my dreams. The obsidian surface gleamed in the torchlight, reflecting distorted images of the hooded figures, turning them into monstrous caricatures. A pulsing, rhythmic thrum emanated from within the sarcophagus, a sickening counterpoint to the chanting. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had followed them for days, ever since I escaped the hidden village, my body screaming in protest with every step. My mind a battlefield of fear and determination. I had to know what they were doing. I had to understand, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to stop them. The procession reached the center of the ruined courtyard, where a large circular mosaic lay half buried beneath the earth and weeds. The mosaic depicted a swirling vortex, surrounded by symbols I recognized from the carvings within the tower. Symbols of a power older than the Templars, older than Christianity itself. A power that felt inherently wrong, twisted. They lowered the sarcophagus onto the mosaic. The thrumming intensified, and the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The chanting reached a fever pitch, becoming a wordless, guttural roar. One of the Templars, presumably the leader, stepped forward. He raised his hands, and the hood fell back, revealing a face I had never seen before, yet recognized instantly. It was the face from my visions, the face that had whispered promises of power in my dreams. His eyes, burning with an unnatural light, fixed on the sarcophagus. He began to speak in a language I didn't understand, but every syllable felt like a violation, a desecration of something sacred. The ground shook violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the mosaic, and a phosphorescent green light began to seep from the cracks. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with a palpable sense of dread. The chanting ceased. An unnerving silence descended upon the ruined courtyard, broken only by the pulsing thrum from the sarcophagus and the rasping breaths of the Templars. Then, the sarcophagus lid began to slide open. I watched, paralyzed by terror, as a thick, black mist poured from the sarcophagus, coiling and writhing like a living thing. The mist rose into the air, swirling around the Templars, who raised their arms in ecstatic supplication. The green light intensified, illuminating the courtyard in an eerie, otherworldly glow. Within the mist, I could see shapes shifting, coalescing, taking form. Faces, hundreds of faces, swirling within the darkness. The faces of the prisoners from the tower. Their eyes, wide and vacant, stared out at me, accusing, pleading, and among them I saw my own face. Not my current face, but a younger version. My eyes filled with the same vacant horror as the others. I stumbled back, a scream tearing from my throat. The Templars turned, their faces now obscured by the swirling mist, their eyes burning like embers in the darkness. The leader, the face from my dreams, smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was something predatory, something ancient and inhuman. "You have always been one of us." His voice echoed in my mind, not through my ears, but deeper, resonating within the very core of my being. "You just didn't know it yet." I scrambled to my feet, turning to flee, but it was too late. The mist was upon me, cold and suffocating, wrapping around me like a shroud. I felt a searing pain in my head, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. My vision blurred. The faces in the mist swirled closer, their vacant eyes burning into mine. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The ground beneath me gave way. I fell, tumbling into darkness, into the swirling vortex of the mosaic, the faces of the prisoners surrounding me, their silent screams echoing in my mind. And as I fell, I understood. I wasn't escaping the tower. I was returning to it. I was returning home. I escaped the tower, where the Templars kept their living prisoners. Part 23. The chanting had grown closer. It seemed to seep from the very stones, a guttural, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through my bones. I pressed myself against the cold, damp wall of the tunnel, the rough stones scraping against my back. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, that clung to the back of my throat. Fear, cold and sharp, gnawed at my insides. The tunnel branched, twisting and turning in a labyrinthine mockery of escape. Every passage looked identical, slick with moisture, and shrouded in an unnatural darkness that swallowed the beam of my flickering lantern. I chose a path at random, driven by a desperate instinct to put as much distance as possible between myself and the chanting. As I pressed on, the tunnels began to narrow, the ceiling lowering until I was forced to stoop. The air grew heavier, thicker, and the metallic scent intensified, now laced with something undeniably putrid. I began to see things in the periphery, fleeting glimpses of movement, a shadow darting across the wall, a flicker of something pale and gaunt in the distance. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the hallucinations away, attributing them to exhaustion and fear. Then I heard it, a soft, wet slithering, close behind me. I whirled around, my lantern swinging wildly, casting distorted shadows that danced across the tunnel walls. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, in the brief flicker of light before the lantern guttered and died, I saw it.